This is video number 7 for a property in Treannadullagh for Chris Bailey. So I finished off in the last video talking about the west elevation. So I'm just going to briefly discuss um, the east elevation here. This is an internal view of the east elevation. And again, I'm going to be making similar recommendations for this wall that I made for the previous wall, which is just basically local patch repairs of any of the plaster that has basically fallen out. So similar to what they've been doing already, because you can see here that they have been doing local repairs on the areas that have been damaged. So I'm going to be recommending the same thing. The only difference is they've used a cement render here, and they may have repointed with cement. So I'm going to recommend using the same lime mortar, a natural hydraulic lime mortar, to locally repoint. So you could rake out any of the loose pointing there up to a depth of, a couple of inches, and then replaster it with the same lime render. So just some local repairs on the areas that are damaged, and I think that should be fine, and we're going to keep it, like, as I would recommend, a minimalist approach. But again, on this wall here, to reduce the amount of rising damp externally, you're going to be putting in a French drain. You're going to reduce the level externally so that you say you're getting a drop of about 6 inches externally where you can. Again, you don't want to undermine the foundations if the foundations are very shallow, but you definitely want to install the French drain to reduce the groundwater table. It's not particularly wet here, although I do notice that the mortar is very soft. The mortar you can again just kind of easily take a lot of it out with your finger. It's quite soft. But, I would have said the wall is still reasonably sound. As I said before, they build walls out of cob walls, out of clay, and they're still standing and they're fine and can be retained. My governing factor in this is, although this wall is out of plumb and is basically kind of, I suppose you would say it's borderline in terms of it's gone slightly out of plumb. The external render, no work has been done on this house for a good while, but the external render is, there's photographs of it earlier on in the report. There's no significant cracking in the external render. Even where the bulges have appeared, there's no significant cracking. Now I'm talking about externally. And, that basically means that it's not currently actively moving. Or if it is, it's moving very, very slowly. So any work that was done, maybe there was some work done on it already, and that's already sort of stopped the movement. Or maybe it was built with the bulges that are in it, it might have been built like that. So because there's no active movement, I would have said that local patch repairs, if we wanted to kind of do a minimalist approach, you could just do local patch repairs and treat it the very same as the west gable wall. Now the internal wall, this is the internal wall here, is the internal stone wall which contains the fireplace. This requires the most remedial work. So this particular area here, you can see that this, now I'm not sure why it was finished this way, like there's a gap here, and I do notice that there's sort of, it may have been that originally there was a thatched roof on this because there's a gap here. I'm not sure what was going on. Some of the stones here are loose at the top of this wall, and what I would have said is not a good idea just to leave loose stones around. So you could either replace some of those stones or repoint them or relay them with the lime mortar, or you could remove them depending on how high up you wanted to go. I suppose if you're talking about doing a cathedral ceiling, what you will really want to do is you probably want to go and finish off that wall to create a nice seal. So the most significant area of damage is around the chimney. because there's a lot of rainwater currently penetrating around the chimney. You can see the timber here is saturated, and you can see that the stones are saturated. And this moisture, this area has been wet for a long time. It's been left like that. And the the mortar between the stones in areas is like muck. I can just take it out with my finger. So it's deteriorating a good bit because of the moisture. Now, there is no movement, like the wall is still plumb, so I would have said it can be retained. And the wall is a good 900 millimeters thick, so it's a good thick wall. Again, what I would be saying here is the first thing you need to do is you need to stop the rainwater coming in so that this wall is protected from moisture. And then you can repoint it. Now, there's no plaster on a lot of this, so you'll be able to repoint all of this stonework up to a depth of at least a couple of inches anyway. And once you've repointed it, then you can talk about putting the roof on it. And you can see here, this again, like all of this mortar here, is some of it's very, very soft and can be raked out with your finger. So that all needs to be repointed there. We can stop the moisture first. Now, one of the things I was going to say to you, because you want to put in the cathedral ceiling, you're going to possibly have to put in a steel beam or a glulam beam, purlin, running from gable wall to gable wall. And if we do that, it's kind of, we need to keep the roof structure very light. But also what you would need to do is, let's say, for example, on this internal wall here, if you're spanning any purlin onto this internal wall, you wouldn't span it directly on the stone. That wouldn't be a good idea, because the stone might locally subside. So what you would really need to do is what they've done here, form a concrete padstone to help distribute the load, and it will also help to hold all of the stones together. So I mean, in the internal wall, what I would be talking about doing was, if the wall is 900 thick, I would be pouring a 900 wide padstone. So the whole wall at the top is kind of tied together. And just locally where the beam comes in, you would have a concrete padstone to help distribute the load. Now, again, on the internal wall, this is the internal door, and the lintel here has failed, really. You can see that the lintel has started to move. This plaster here has started to give, so there's a little bit of movement in this wall here. So you look at this and you think, what do we do about it? Now, to be honest, the height of this door is too low. It's 1.582 meters clear height, which is too low for today's conditions. I mean, a standard new door requires a clear opening height of 1.980. So I would be talking about, removing this door, putting in a higher door, a much higher door. So when you look at the wall that's over, and if your new door is going to be 400 millimeter higher, it's going to be up here. Really, I suppose the sensible approach here would be to deconstruct this section of wall, because there's no real roof load coming on it. Deconstruct this section of wall, take out those timber lintels, replace them with concrete lintels, precast concrete lintels, and then to rebuild up that wall then again in concrete blockwork. And you'd be putting in your new lintels at a higher level, and then your concrete lintels will help to tie the wall back to the main wall. Will help to kind of, because I suppose this wall here, this internal wall, will be providing some bracing, some lateral restraint to the front wall. So it's important to maintain that tie if you can. Now this is just another view showing that this section of wall over the door, over the internal door, it's quite wide. It's 700 millimeters wide, so there's a little bit of stonework to come out of there. That's a top view showing just over the door there. So it's not clear what type of lintel is in there already, or what the construction is. But I just said I'd include it. Now so that's the internal wall. That's the wall where most of the work needs to be done. Now, other than that, this is the front south elevation. Um, so again, if we're deciding to go ahead and do a kind of a very minimalist approach and just to do enough to get the building back in serviceable condition, I would have said you need to do very little on the front wall. Again, you're going to be providing the French drain externally, reducing levels externally where possible to try and get a minimum of 150 millimeters or 6 inches. Um, and other than that, all you're really going to be doing is, the cement render on the front is in pretty good condition. If there's any cracks, they could be filled and then repainted. And hopefully that will be enough. Now you can see here there is a kind of a rising damp. You see here that the plaster or the lime wash, this local area of wall here appears to have lime wash and possibly lime plaster on it as well. You can see the different texture on it, and it looks very different to the cement one. You can see here up to about a height of 1.2 meters, or up to this height, which is generally as high as rising damp tends to go. Sometimes it'll go higher, but in general it's about up to waist height. That's kind of as high as it goes, and that's kind of just a general rule, but it sometimes go higher. So you can see that up here this lime wash is in good condition, but down here the rising damp has sort of over time pushed it off. But hopefully the French drain will take care of that. So the only other thing that you would need to do with this front wall is the timber lintels. That's just a close-up of the lime there. You can kind of see the lime plaster. Incidentally, this box here, there was an animal that was coming in here, and there's an animal that's come in and he's kind of been in this box and he's defecated in the box, and the box is falling apart and there's shit in it basically. So be very careful. If you move that box, the underside of it is going to open and all the shit that's in the bottom of it is going to come out of it. So be very careful about moving that box. So that animal is still gaining access, because the last time I went in there was new shit on the floor in this area here. So I can see there's an animal getting in and he's defecating on the floor. He can get in under this door here. So he's still getting in under this door. So I don't know what kind of an animal it is, whether it's a pine marten or whatever it is, but be careful with that box. It's just, it fell apart on me and I had to turn it upside down and put everything back into it. Now that's that lime wall. The other thing that you need to do with the front wall is you've got a timber lintel here in this window and probably in the other window. So they need to be replaced with concrete lintels. So if you look at the closer view here on the next page, that's going to be, see it's rotten there, that timber lintel needs to be replaced. So you replace that with a concrete lintel. And then again, I've spoken about this already. This rear wall, I was wrong. I made a mistake before. I told you that this was a hollow block wall. It's not. The reason I told you it was a hollow block wall because Mr. McHugh, the man who's watching this land for you, he was there. I met him the first day I was on site. He told me that he could remember it being built as a hollow block wall. So that's kind of why I told you it was a hollow block wall. But he must have remembered incorrectly, because when I took a closer view at it the second visit, I could see that it was actually, it's poured. It's basically a poured concrete wall. And I'd say the original stone wall was in poor condition and it was replaced with this. And it was probably done in the 1950s, because this was common in the 1950s for them to pour and shutter. When cement came in, cement is stronger and it holds better. The walls started to get thinner. And what they started doing in the 50s, before the concrete blocks came in, they started to pour and shutter walls in, 300 or 400 mils height. Pour that, and then pour the next height, and then pour the next height, and the next height. And you can see around the window where it's actually poured and shuttered. The aggregate that they used to use was often just dredged from the local river, so it's often quite rounded stone, and there's just a little bit of cement in it, just to kind of, to hold it all together. So that whole wall is a kind of a concrete wall or a cement wall, so there would be absolutely no point in removing the render from this wall externally anyway. That wall again is in good condition. I would have said you needed to do very little with it. It's plumb, there's no cracks. Again, all I would be recommending is externally putting in the French drain, reducing the level where possible, and just repainting the outside. And this is just a close-up at the window frame here. You can see here some of the stones there where that wall is basically poured and shuttered. So it's a concrete wall. And now this is, just to bear in mind, this is adjacent the internal wall here. That's the external concrete wall there. Now it does appear that this section here, you can see that crack there, part of this wall may have actually been dismantled and poured with this wall. So I'm not sure how far back the concrete wall comes in. It might come in this far, it might come in this far. It's hard to see. So part of that might also have been poured concrete. But I just noticed the crack in it there. And that's it. So again, taking a very minimalist approach as to what you would do. And it's mostly just patch repairs and addition of the French drain. Now there's a good bit of information in that for you to go through. So if you want to go through it, if you have any questions, I'm sure you'll have any questions. I'm sure you'll have some. If you have any, give me a buzz and I can talk you through any questions you might have. And the best of luck with it. All right. Thanks, Chris. Bye.